John was the commissary sergeant, and they started a Masonic league, and he was an officer with the Masonic group. And so things seemed to be going really well. And then on June 6, 1876, the butcher over in Wilmington that was getting a little concerned because he had not heard from John Woodlock for payment for the meat he was giving for the sport, got on a boat and came down from Wilmington to Southport, and he went to go find John Woodlock. And John was heading home for dinner, and he asked the butcher, "Come join me." So he did, and they went to dinner, and they had a nice dinner, according to the butcher. He said the wife was really nice. And John said, "Well, just stay here, finish your coffee, and I'm going over to my office." When he gets to his office, and then the butcher is saying, "Thank you, Miss Woodlock," he starts heading, he hears a gunshot. John had killed himself because he was embezzling the funds that belonged to the Army and not paying the providers who were giving the food to the fort. So that shows a different kilter in the whole story of John Woodlock. And so then, that bit I just told you, I wrote up, my husband and I wrote it up, and we put it in the, They put it was online, and I got an email from a woman out in Arkansas, and she said, "I thought my great-grandmother was Margaret Woodlock, but we couldn't understand because her name is Margaret Kennedy, and she married a John Kennedy." And she talked about, she came over on the city of Brussels, but how could her husband, her first husband, die in October when she was already married to a John Kennedy? So the story, what happened, Margaret married John Kennedy, who was a good friend of her husband, John Woodlock. John Kennedy, adopted baby John Woodlock Jr., and they moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. They had 2 more children. They had, 2 girls and 2 boys, and they are buried in the Little Rock, Arkansas cemetery. So the only thing that has really thrown question is, why does the commemorative stone for John Woodlock say October 30th? The daughters all died of diphtheria in September. And they all say of the daughter of the late commissary sergeant, so it had to have been the June 6th. It was just a date because it says on the tombstone, according to his bereaved wife, or at the request of his bereaved wife. She just wanted a different date. So not going back to the suicide date. But think about it. Suicides were not buried in consecrated grounds. So he's not buried here, but there's a tombstone here that was put up after the daughter's tombstone. It's also very strange. Most tombstones, and if you'll notice walking through this cemetery, face the east. Because on the last day, the Lord shall arise from the east, and that's when the horsemen come. I'm just throwing in all that, but I can't remember from what I read. The date is totally off. It doesn't make any sense as to why she did that. But she lived happily, according to her great-great-granddaughter, or great-granddaughter, that as far as she knew, till she died and was buried there in Little Rock, Arkansas. It shows, though, that visitors to Southport come and live for a while, and sometimes hopefully on their own 2 feet, or in a carriage or a car, and not because they've committed suicide. It's an interesting story. And it's really interesting that I can help solve this woman who was trying to figure out what didn't make sense to her, but it did make sense when you realize the stone is not dated properly. They died one day after another. Diphtheria and yellow fever was a big killer here. And you wander through these graveyards, you'll see a lot of children, died at 19 months and 3 days died. And they don't say diphtheria, but there was a big one. I want to say, no, there was a big one in 1812. Yellow fever wiped out a whole lot of people here on the fort and in the town. But there are pockets of diphtheria would hit and children died. So now you know the ghost story. You all heard the ghost story? Yes, here in the back. So there's the ghost story and then there's the real story. So now you have to go into Franklin Park and find the three sisters.
I was going to say, when you take that tour on the cart, they'll point out that tree.
Yes,
the three
sisters. And I'm not too sure he realizes they're these three sisters. I've always told him, come and he'll tell you the story of the three sisters. So, yeah.